Manager blocks black man from meeting, not knowing he's the new CEO who just pulled a $10 million deal. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Marcus Henderson walked into the corporate office of Wexler Enterprises. He had no way of knowing that his life was about to change forever. Marcus had always been a quiet, hard-working man. He didn't seek attention or fame. In fact, he preferred the quiet. As a senior consultant for a major financial firm, Marcus was used to making the numbers work, ensuring every deal was perfected and every strategy executed flawlessly. But today, something was different. The familiar hum of the office seemed louder than usual, and he felt a strange sensation creeping into his stomach. He pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to nerves from an important meeting he had scheduled. The deal he'd secured the previous week, $10 million, was a game-changer for Wexler Enterprises. It was supposed to be the moment that marked his arrival into the high echelons of corporate power. Instead, Marcus was met with a shocking realization. As he stepped off the elevator and walked into the sleek, glass-lined lobby, he immediately noticed a tense air in the room. People were whispering, their gazes shifting in his direction. But Marcus wasn't sure why. He had been to this building countless times. No one had ever looked at him this way before. His mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. He checked his watch. It was almost time for the meeting to start. "Good morning, Marcus." A voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Cheryl, the receptionist. She always greeted him with a smile, and this time it was no different. "Morning, Cheryl," Marcus replied, offering her a smile as he adjusted his tie. He walked up to the desk, expecting to get his visitor pass, and head to the conference room. "Just a minute," Cheryl said, holding up a finger. "I'll get you checked in." But as Cheryl clicked away at the computer, Marcus noticed something strange. The usual eagerness in her face seemed replaced with an unease he couldn't quite place. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, trying to keep the mood light. "Oh, yeah, just a little busy this morning," Cheryl said with a nervous laugh, but it didn't sound convincing. She handed him his pass, and with a quick "good luck," Marcus turned toward the elevators. As he walked toward the doors, a man emerged from a hallway, a tall, well-dressed man in his late 40s. He was a middle manager in the firm, but Marcus had never seen him before. The man's gaze shifted briefly toward Marcus, and then back down to his phone, dismissing him without a second thought. Marcus felt a slight irritation, but he chose to ignore it. The higher-ups at Wexler Enterprises were sometimes a little too focused on their own agendas. The elevator ride to the top floor was short, but it felt like an eternity. Marcus stared at his reflection in the polished stainless steel doors, trying to steady his nerves. This was it. This was the moment that could define his career. Everything he had worked for had led him here. The $10 million deal he'd landed was just the beginning. But there was a part of him that couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When the elevator doors opened, Marcus stepped out into the sleek, modern corridor that led to the boardroom. He walked past a few glass-walled offices, noticing the people inside staring at their computers. But as he approached the door to the boardroom, something caught his attention. There, standing just outside the room, was the same man from earlier, the one he had seen in the hallway. The man glanced up at Marcus and then back down at his phone, clearly ignoring his presence. "Excuse me," Marcus said, stepping closer. "I'm here for the 10 a.m. meeting. I'm Marcus Henderson." The man didn't even look up. He simply waved his hand dismissively. "Sorry you can't go in," the man muttered. "This meeting's for senior management only." Marcus frowned, not sure if he had heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what?" The man looked up for the first time, a slight sneer forming on his lips. "Senior management. You don't belong in there. The meeting's already started, and it's not your place." There was a beat of silence as Marcus processed what he had just heard. Was this some kind of joke? This man didn't know who he was. He was one of the few people who had secured a $10 million deal for Wexler Enterprises, and yet this stranger, who clearly had no idea who Marcus was blocking him from entering a meeting he was supposed to be leading. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "I think you're mistaken. I'm Marcus Henderson. I'm the new CEO of Wexler Enterprises." The man's eyes flickered with a trace of confusion, but the sneer didn't disappear. "Right," the man said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sure you are. And I'm the President of the United States." Marcus felt his patience wear thin. He could feel the pressure building in his chest, but he refused to let this man see him lose control. Instead, he straightened his posture, looking the man directly in the eyes. "Let me in. Now." The man paused, as if weighing his options. "You've got a lot of nerve, don't you?" "I'm not here to argue," Marcus said coolly. "I'm here to take my seat in that meeting. And if you don't let me in right now, you'll regret it." The man stepped aside with a scowl, clearly unimpressed by Marcus' words. But as Marcus walked past him toward the door, the man muttered something under his breath, too quietly for Marcus to hear, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a muttered insult, a dismissal, and it felt like a slap in the face. Marcus opened the door to the boardroom, expecting the usual sea of white faces staring at him, but what he saw instead took him by surprise. The room was filled with a mix of senior executives, all gathered around the massive oval table. Their eyes immediately shifted toward him as he stepped inside, and for a split second, there was a stunned silence. "Marcus," said Carol Monroe, the former CEO and one of the few people who knew about the $10 million deal, her voice tight with surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for the meeting," Marcus replied, his voice steady. He could feel the tension rising in the room, the sudden realization that something was wrong. I don't think you're supposed to be in here," one of the executives said, his voice shaky. "I'm the new CEO," Marcus said, repeating the words with the same calm assurance. "And this meeting is about my deal, the $10 million contract I just secured. You'll be hearing about it shortly, but for now, I'm taking my seat." There was a long pause. The executives exchanged uncertain glances, and for a moment, Marcus wondered if they were all thinking the same thing. How could he be the new CEO? Everyone knew Carol had just stepped down, but no one knew who the replacement would be. The shock was evident on every face. The man who had blocked Marcus outside the meeting stood frozen by the door, his face a mixture of disbelief and regret. Marcus could feel his eyes burning into him, and it was clear he had no idea who he was dealing with. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto the man. "You didn't recognize me earlier, but now you see. I'm the one who's in charge here. I'm the one who made the $10 million deal happen. So let's sit down, and I'll show you how this company is going to grow under my leadership." For a moment, no one moved. The room was frozen in time, each person processing the unexpected turn of events. Then Carol stood up, her face pale, but her voice steady. I didn't expect this," she said quietly, her eyes flicking to Marcus. "But it's done now. I guess we'll have to move forward with this." The tension in the room shifted, and the meeting began. But as Marcus took his seat at the head of the table, he knew this was just the beginning of something bigger. What had started as a misunderstanding was now a challenge, and he was determined to prove that he was more than capable of leading Wexler Enterprises to new heights. And as for the man who had blocked him at the door, Marcus had no intention of letting that slide. He was here now, and no one was going to stand in his way. The room had shifted. It wasn't just the physical arrangement of the chairs or the exchange of subtle glances. It was the atmosphere itself that had changed. What had been a place of calculated decisions, hushed tones, and careful negotiations had now become a battleground. Marcus could feel the tension crawling up his spine as he slid into the CEO chair at the head of the table. He could almost hear the collective thought racing through the minds of the executives. Who is this man, and why is he sitting here? The murmurs died down as Marcus placed his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. His eyes scanned each person's face, assessing the room. Some looked genuinely surprised, others wary, a few with an unreadable expression, and one or two who seemed to be trying to suppress a smirk. Carol Monroe, the former CEO, had retaken her seat, her eyes flickering to him occasionally, though she wasn't yet ready to speak. It was clear that she was struggling to come to terms with the new reality. The company she had spent years building was now under the leadership of a man she hadn't even had the chance to properly meet, let alone train. "All right," Marcus said, his voice carrying a cool confidence that made everyone's attention snap to him. "We're here to discuss the future of Wexler Enterprises. We're here to talk about the $10 million deal I've just secured for this company. But more than that, we're here to discuss how this company is going to evolve under new leadership. I know it might be a shock to some of you, but I'm not here to discuss who I am. I'm here to discuss what I'm going to do, what we're going to do together." The silence that followed was palpable, thick with hesitation and unspoken doubts. A few people exchanged uncertain glances. But Marcus didn't flinch. He knew the doubts were there, but he also knew how to address them. His mind had always been sharp, and his ability to read people, understand their motives, and adapt had made him an invaluable asset in his previous roles. He had no intention of backing down now. "Let's start with the deal," Marcus continued, his eyes moving to Carol. "Carol, I'm sure you've already reviewed the terms of the agreement. You and I, we both know this isn't just any ordinary deal. It's a game changer. We've got an opportunity here to not only solidify our place in the market, but to expand, grow, and establish Wexler Enterprises as a leader in our industry. But we can't do that if we're sitting here second-guessing each other." Carol took a deep breath, clearly unsure of how to respond. She had been the face of the company for years, and although she had been stepping down to take on a less hands-on role, she had no idea that the transition would happen so abruptly. More than that, she had no idea that Marcus would come in like this, with such confidence, and assert his position with a boldness that was unsettling. "You're right," Carol said, her voice tight. "The deal is important. It could set the stage for something bigger. But we need to understand what the future looks like before we move forward. It's not just about the numbers, Marcus. It's about vision. It's about leadership. And if I'm being honest, we weren't prepared for this." Marcus's expression softened, but only slightly. He wasn't there to criticize or to make Carol look bad. He understood her struggle. This had been her company for years, and now she was handing it over to someone she didn't know. But he was also well aware that the world didn't wait for anyone, especially not for those who were stuck in the past. "I'm not here to undo the work you've done," Marcus replied evenly. "In fact, I'm here because of it. Your leadership brought this company to the point where it could handle a $10 million deal. But now we need to think bigger. We need to think globally. We need to scale." The other executives were still listening, and Marcus could see their unease shifting slightly. He could feel the subtle change in their body language as they began to lean forward just a little bit, as if eager to hear more. That was good. He needed them on his side, or at least to open their minds to the possibility of change. One of the men, Gregory Ellis, a senior vice president of operations, cleared his throat. "Marcus, I don't think anyone is questioning your ability to secure deals. But you're talking about scaling, about expanding into new territories. That's a huge shift. We need to be certain before we make any moves. The board will want to know exactly how we're going to achieve this. What's the plan? How do we grow? And where's the money coming from?" Marcus nodded, acknowledging Gregory's point. "I understand, Gregory. The plan is simple, but it's also bold. We have the foundation we need: financial strength, a solid customer base, and a market position that gives us leverage. But we're missing something important: innovation. We need to focus on emerging technologies. I've already begun discussions with a few key players in the tech sector. We can integrate their products into our offerings, create new partnerships, and leverage their resources. The deal I brought in wasn't just about the money. It's about the strategic alliances it opens up." He paused, letting that sink in. The room was still silent. Everyone was thinking, processing. Marcus wasn't looking for immediate approval. He knew that would take time. What he needed right now was for these people to start seeing the potential in his vision, to stop clinging to the old ways of doing things. "And in terms of finances," Marcus continued, "the capital we've secured through this deal is just the beginning. We're going to expand our reach into international markets. We'll secure additional rounds of funding, but more importantly, we'll reinvest in our core strengths, our people, our innovation, and our customer relationships. Carol's eyes narrowed slightly. And you're sure we can handle this kind of growth? It's not just about the money, Marcus. It's about managing people, expectations, and risks. We're not a startup. We're a well-established company with a reputation. Marcus could see the doubt lingering in her voice, but he also saw the flicker of curiosity. She wasn't outright rejecting his ideas. That was a good sign. I know what it's like to be part of a company that's stuck in its ways, Marcus said, his voice low and steady. I've been there. But the world changes. We have to change with it, and we can't afford to wait. He felt the weight of the words hanging in the air, knowing full well the power they held. This wasn't just about business strategy. This was about a mindset shift. This was about proving that the old guard couldn't hold onto power forever. The industry had been changing around them, and if they didn't adapt, they'd be left behind. The room grew quieter, and Marcus could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, the scrutiny almost tangible. But he didn't back down. This was his moment. This was what he had worked for. Just as he thought the conversation was beginning to settle, there was a sharp knock at the door. One of the younger executives, a woman in her late 20s named Rebecca, got up to answer it. She peeked her head inside and said something quietly to the man who had blocked Marcus earlier, the one who hadn't recognized him as the new CEO. The man's face was still red, a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. The executive closed the door behind her, and the tension in the room grew even thicker. Marcus didn't need to ask what had just happened. He could already guess. The man who had blocked him from entering the meeting earlier was now the subject of the room's focus. Rebecca returned to her seat, her eyes lingering on Marcus for just a moment before she sat back down. "So what's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling. The man who had blocked Marcus, his name was Harold, as Marcus now knew, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He finally looked up at Marcus, his eyes meeting his with a mixture of embarrassment and something else, fear. Marcus knew this wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not when the entire room was still unsure whether they were ready to follow him. Harold had underestimated him earlier, and he would have to face the consequences of that. "Now," Marcus said, leaning back slightly in his chair, "we get to work." The room went silent. Everyone was waiting for something, an answer, a direction, maybe even an apology. But Marcus wasn't interested in apologies. They were irrelevant now. What mattered was action. "We're all going to move forward together," he said firmly, "but it starts now. It starts with me, and it starts with all of you." His gaze moved slowly from one person to the next, ensuring every single person in that room understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about him asserting his authority. It was about setting the tone for the future. The room, still tense, finally seemed to exhale collectively. It wasn't complete acceptance yet, but it was progress. They were beginning to see him for who he really was. And that, in itself, was the first step toward changing everything. Marcus knew that the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, with people who would challenge him, question him, and perhaps even undermine him. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had taken control, and no one, not even Harold, could take that from him now. And so, as the meeting continued, the weight of the decision settled deeper into the fabric of the company. Change had come, and Marcus Henderson was just getting started. The tension that had gripped the room began to dissipate, but it wasn't gone entirely. As Marcus spoke, his words carried weight, each one deliberate and precise, but the silence that followed his statements lingered. The room wasn't yet ready to embrace him fully. He understood that. This wasn't a battle that could be won in a single meeting, or with a few confident remarks. It would take time, patience, and above all, the results of his decisions to prove that he belonged in the seat he now occupied. The meeting stretched on for another hour. Marcus talked strategy. He outlined his vision for the company, covering everything from new product lines to expansion plans into foreign markets. He spoke with clarity and conviction, explaining how the infusion of new capital from the deal he had brokered would propel them forward, not just as a company, but as an innovator in their field. But even as he spoke, Marcus could feel the skepticism simmering beneath the surface, particularly from the old guard, Carol, Harold, and a few of the others who had been there for years. They were the pillars, the people who had built Wexler Enterprises from the ground up, and they weren't ready to let go of that control easily. Marcus knew he couldn't force it. He wasn't the kind of leader who believed in bulldozing his way through. If he wanted them to follow him, he would need to earn their trust, and trust wasn't something that came overnight. That was the hard part. People didn't just accept change because it was necessary. They had to be shown, step by step, that the new direction was the right one. He had proven himself in the past, and he knew he would have to do so again. As the meeting began to wind down, Marcus stood up. His eyes scanned the table once more, his gaze meeting each of theirs, lingering just long enough to make them feel the weight of his presence. He wasn't looking for applause or agreement. He was looking for acknowledgement. The kind of acknowledgement that came from understanding and respect, not just the silent acquiescence of people who were too afraid to speak up. "I'm going to give you all some time to process what we've discussed today," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "I know this isn't easy. You've all been through a lot of transitions over the past few months, and this one may feel like a leap into the unknown. But I assure you, we are on the verge of something big. We're about to take Wexler Enterprises to places it's never been before." He glanced at Carol, who still hadn't spoken much since he began presenting his plans. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. Despite the tension, he could see that she was listening. She was trying to figure out who he really was, what kind of man he was. Was he just another opportunist trying to make a quick buck? Or was he someone who could truly steer the company in the right direction? "We have a lot of work ahead of us," Marcus continued. "But I have faith in this team. We'll meet again in a week to go over our next steps. I expect all of you to come prepared with your thoughts and questions. Let's make this work." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, feeling the weight of the eyes on his back. He didn't look back. He knew that they would have to come to terms with the reality of the situation on their own time. He had given them the information, laid out the plan. The rest was up to them. The following week was a whirlwind. Marcus spent most of his time meeting with department heads, diving into the nitty-gritty of the business, and establishing relationships with potential new partners. He wasn't just the CEO on paper now. He was living it, breathing it, making decisions and taking actions. He could feel the company shifting, but not everyone was on board yet. Some of the executives were still holding back, cautious, unsure if they could trust him. And Carol was still watching him, still sizing him up, as though waiting for him to slip up. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Marcus found himself standing in front of the massive windows that overlooked the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the skyline. He looked out at the lights beginning to flicker on, the steady hum of the city life below. It was a peaceful moment, one that gave him a sense of clarity amidst the chaos. But it didn't last. The sound of his phone vibrating on the desk broke the stillness. He picked it up and saw that it was a message from Rebecca, the young executive who had seemed eager to get to know him during the meeting. She was part of his inner circle now, working closely with him to streamline operations and enhance the company's outreach efforts. Her message was short but to the point. "Marcus, we need to talk. It's important." Without hesitation, he picked up the phone and dialed her number. "Rebecca," he said, his voice calm but curious. "What's going on?" "Marcus," she replied, sounding more urgent than usual. "There's something you need to know. It's about Harold." "Harold?" Marcus repeated. He had been expecting resistance from Harold, but nothing had indicated this level of concern. "What's happened?" "It's not just that he's not on board with the changes. I think he's trying to sabotage things from the inside. He's been meeting with some of the other senior executives behind your back, trying to convince them that you're not the right person for the job. He's spreading rumors, undermining your leadership, and even trying to convince them to go to the board with a vote of no confidence." Marcus felt a cold rush of anger surge through him. Harold had underestimated him, no doubt about it. But this was crossing the line. The fact that Harold was already trying to orchestrate a coup, less than 2 weeks into his tenure, made Marcus's blood boil. He had expected resistance, even suspicion, but this was something different. Harold wasn't just questioning his leadership. He was actively trying to destroy it. "Thanks for letting me know, Rebecca," Marcus said, his voice tight. "I'll take care of it." He hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, staring at the city below. The calmness he had felt just moments ago evaporated, replaced by a steely determination. He had known the path to success wouldn't be easy, but this was more than just a professional challenge. This was personal. Harold had tried to block him from entering that first meeting. Now he was trying to tear down everything Marcus had worked for. It was time to deal with Harold, once and for all. The next morning, Marcus called for a private meeting with Carol, Gregory, and a few of the other senior executives. He didn't tell them exactly why he had called the meeting, but he made it clear that it was important. They all arrived one by one, and as they settled into their seats, Marcus could sense the tension in the room. They were curious, but also wary of what he might say. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus began, standing at the head of the table. "I know you've all been hearing a lot of things over the past few days about the company, about the direction I'm taking us, and about the future. But there's something I need to address, something that's become a distraction." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "It has come to my attention," Marcus continued, "that some of you, specifically Harold, have been going behind my back, meeting with other executives, and attempting to undermine my leadership. This cannot and will not be tolerated." The room went dead silent. Carol's face had turned pale, but her eyes were locked on Marcus, as though she was trying to read him. Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but no one spoke. "I'm not here to make enemies," Marcus said, his voice calm but resolute. "But I'm also not here to let anyone sabotage the success of this company. Harold, I want you in my office after this meeting." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Harold's face turned crimson. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then shut it. Marcus didn't give him the chance. He had already made his point. The room was on edge, but Marcus knew he had to take control. The executives would need to understand that this was his company now. He would decide the future, and anyone who wasn't willing to follow could find their way out. The meeting concluded soon after, and as the executives filed out, Marcus sat in the chair at the head of the table, his fingers steepled in front of him. He had made his first move. Now, it was time for Harold to face the consequences. Minutes later, Harold walked into Marcus's office, his face flushed with indignation. He wasn't prepared for what was coming, and Marcus intended to make sure he never underestimated him again. "Harold," Marcus said coolly, "you've made a mistake. But you still have time to fix it. I suggest you think carefully about your next steps." Harold stood at the door of Marcus's office, his face betraying his anger, but also a flicker of hesitation. He wasn't used to being confronted like this, not by someone younger, not by someone who had only recently stepped into a position that was once his to command. He had been part of Wexler Enterprises for over 2 decades. To him, the company was his domain, his legacy. Now a new CEO, someone who had walked into the door just a few weeks ago, was challenging his control. But what hurt even more was the way Marcus had handled it. There was no yelling, no bluster, just cold, calm determination. Harold didn't know what was worse, the fact that Marcus had caught him or that he had done so effortlessly. "You've been meeting with other senior executives," Marcus continued, his voice smooth but with an undeniable edge. "You've been plotting against me, trying to sow doubt, trying to sabotage everything we've built." He paused, letting the words hang heavy in the air, the weight of them sinking in. "I want to give you a chance, Harold. You've got one shot to fix this." Harold opened his mouth to protest, to defend himself, but Marcus raised his hand. "I don't want to hear excuses. I don't care about your reasons. This company can't afford internal sabotage. You know that, don't you?" Harold swallowed hard, his pride taking a hit. It wasn't just about the company. It was about his position, his standing, his influence. But standing here now, with Marcus looking at him as though he were a simple obstacle to be removed, Harold knew that things had changed. He wasn't in control anymore. He hadn't been for some time, not since the board had brought Marcus in. Harold had been blind to it, clinging to the past, to the way things used to be. Now he was staring down the undeniable truth. Marcus was in charge, and he had no place in this new order unless he played along. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Here's the deal, Harold. You can either walk away from this gracefully, resign with dignity, and save whatever's left of your reputation, or you can keep fighting. But know this, if you fight me, you'll lose. I'm not backing down. I won't let you or anyone else tear this company apart. You're either with me or against me. Harold's chest tightened, the weight of the situation settling over him like a heavy blanket. His mind raced. The thought of resigning stung, his ego bristling at the idea of being cast aside. But deep down, he knew Marcus was right. He had been playing a dangerous game, trying to pull strings behind the scenes, thinking that he could manipulate the board and the other executives into siding with him. But Marcus had already outsmarted him. It wasn't just about the deal or the company. It was about control. And Harold had already lost it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Harold spoke, his voice low. I'll go. I won't make this harder than it has to be. Marcus studied him for a moment, the tension thick in the room. But then, without a word, he nodded. Good choice. Harold stood up slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As he turned to walk out, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his actions, the bitterness of losing everything he had worked for, the realization that he had been outplayed. But there was no turning back now. As Harold left the office, Marcus sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The fight had been difficult, but it was necessary. He had made his point, not just with Harold, but with the entire team. They would see now who was in charge, who was calling the shots. It was time to move forward. Time to bring the company into a new era. The $10 million deal was just the beginning. There was more to come, and Marcus would be the one to lead them to it. He stood up, walking to the window once more, gazing out at the city. The horizon stretched out before him, full of promise, full of potential. He had come this far. Now, he was ready for what lay ahead.